Hello and good afternoon. On behalf of HP, thank you for joining this webinar, Evolving Your Technology Organization Through Information, Integration, and Inspiration. I'm pleased to introduce our presenters today who are eager to share the trends they see in this current IT environment. We have a special guest, Andrew Hewitt, who is an analyst with Forrester Research Incorporated. We also have Ron Guerrier, Chief Information Officer for HP. We will kick off the agenda with our main topic, Evolving Your Technology, and then go into Q&A for any questions you may have. There will be a survey after closing remarks, and we really would appreciate your feedback. So let's get started, Andrew. Andrew, now is your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. Ron, it's such a pleasure to chat with you today. It's always great to chat directly with the CIO. I know we have a lot of areas that we want to cover today, but essentially, we want to talk about the changing role of the CIO in IT organizations today, and how they're championing information, integration, and inspiration to really drive business outcomes, business success going forward. So pleasure to have you here today, Ron.
I'm excited to be here, Andrew, and I'm excited to kind of share with this forum. Let's go. Let's do this.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. So as we were putting this together, we were really thinking about these three key areas, right, of championing information, orchestrating integration, and inspiring technology. So I certainly have my take on this, but Ron, given that you are a CIO and you have tons of CIO experience, what do these three kind of key roles mean for you in your role today? And then I can give my perspective on that as well.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you, Andrew. So very, very high level, because I know we're actually going to double click on a lot of these topics. So the first one, championing information, that's more of a broad view of the core role of any CIO. Essentially making sure the trains run on time. The CEO doesn't want to hear from you on Mondays when there's an issue. If that's the only thing he's hearing from you, then there's probably a broader issue. So just the core role of the CIO, protecting data and all that. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. The second one is the orchestration role, bringing in different best in breeds, those topics, making sure that the CIO understands that is very important, especially in a global economy and global tech. And the third one is inspiration. We'll talk about this definitely in detail. The role of the CIO is to inspire folks on what's next and explore what's next. And now I would say is there's no better time to be in tech. So those are the three very high levels, and I know we're going to get into a lot more depth as we have more conversation.
Absolutely. And what I love about these three concepts today is I think they all feed into one of the major goals and one of the changing priorities for CIOs today, which is the success of the employee, of the customers that they're actually serving with the technology that they deploy to their users. This concept of employee experience, employee technology experience is absolutely something I'm hearing from many of the CIOs that I talk to today. And actually in our research, we've identified, the drivers of experience and employee engagement in the workplace today. And actually 30% of what most impacts someone's experience at work is the technology that they use on a daily basis. The things that help them be successful in their jobs and help them grow at their organizations. All of those are technology related. So I think one of the major things that's changed is that the CIO has so much more impact on employee engagement, on these broader business outcomes of experience, satisfaction, engagement, retention of talent over time, because the role of technology is just becoming more and more important. And I think all of these areas, whether it's protecting that information in a remote environment, integrating all different types of employee-facing apps, or just providing new and inspiring technologies to help people be more successful, are all related to that whole concept of employee experience and the role that the CIO plays. So I think that does bring together a lot of these concepts as well. It's one of the major things I'm seeing. So let's jump in a little bit and cover each of these categories here. So the first one that we have is championing information. So we say information is the new currency of the future. Data is a core asset in an IT environment. Protecting information is paramount. Empowering technology to be more customer-centric. All of these are key levers for championing that information in the current age. And when I think about this, and Ron, I'd be interested in your perspective on these as I go through these too, which is when I think about data and how that's changing, it all comes back to me about data around sort of the end user experience. And I just completed a Forrester wave evaluation on what we call end user experience management tools, which collect data around the user experience, right? And 20% of tech decision makers are actually investing in that category over the next 12 months. And what's different about that form of data is that it's not necessarily just performance data on back-end applications and networks and sort of IT-centric data, but it's data from the perspective of the user. So I think that's one of the big changes that's happening in this space now is that CIOs and a lot of their direct reports, whether it's in end-user computing or collaboration or other service owners, are much more likely to be using that telemetry data to actually inform how they deliver that business outcome to the end user. And certainly these other areas too, protecting information is paramount. Forrester's call on sort of remote working is that there's going to be a 300% increase in remote workers permanently going forward. In the US, that's 7%, all the way up to 21%. Your data is not going to be in the data center anymore. It's going to be everywhere, right? And so making sure that you have a way for people to securely access that so they can become productive wherever they are continues to be a major priority. And on this third one, in customer centricity, I think, and certainly interested in your perspective on this too, Ron, which is for a long time, IT organizations, CIOs, and the direct reports, as well as the managers of different services, have been really goaled around traditional IT metrics, right? Like things like mean time to resolution, MTTR, or just incident reduction, help desk ticket reduction, that sort of thing. We're hearing a lot more about what's called experience level agreements as opposed to service level agreements, where you're really goaled on the better experience that you give to employees. And about 1/4, according to our surveys, of IT employees are actually goaled on end user experience improvements. So I think that all comes to reorient the IT organization to be much more customer centric. So Ron, your take on this category here?
Well, this one, we could probably spend an entire hour and a half on this one topic. But I'm going to try to kind of decompose it down to kind of the bare parts. And so the first thing I'll quickly do is a quick history lesson. So I'm a history nut. I love history and the kind of how things are and the context. And if you remember way back in the day, gasoline was something that no one cared about. Gasoline was actually a byproduct. We actually, unfortunately, put them in rivers, lakes. Gasoline was important. Kerosene was the moneymaker. And the Rockefellers kind of built off of that. But then the combustible engine came up, and all of a sudden we realized that gasoline was the moneymaker and actually the really raw, the power behind things. And gasoline became the primary product, and kerosene became secondary. In my opinion, and being a CIO several times over, I've seen that evolution even more in the last 10 to 15 years. Like the data is now gold, and organizations are actually purchased and sold based off of sometimes not the attributes of the company, but the data they have behind it. So for me, data has become paramount. And at one point, if those of you remember, before the role of CIO was named, we were system integrators, we were system development. But then the CIO role kind of evolved, but no one cared about the data. It was kind of this, oh yeah, we got to deal with the data. It was always this if, oh, by the way. Now data is leading the conversation. And I would say that with strong architecture, clearly that's the foundation to everything to do, IT architecture, data is the next most important thing outside of cyber. And I'll say cyber is important because you're protecting what? Your data. So it's very important that we understand the data and kind of where it goes. And so at HP, we really do focus on the data, and we understand that the data footprint is growing exponentially, not only due to IoT and all the devices we have that are starting to talk to each other, but also our homes are now an extension of our work environment. And so the data is now in our homes. And as we talk about cyber, the CISO's role has expanded to now my residents. And that has changed the conversation as well. But it truly is an important asset, understanding the consumer's data, but understanding the enterprise data. But more importantly, as you talk, Andrew, spot on, the customer centricity of what we do. We're in business to serve the needs of a customer. And our customers have a very discerning expectation that we're going to protect their data. But more importantly, they want to know that we know who they are. They know Ron. They know that Ron likes motorcycles. They know Ron likes this, Ron like that. And they create solutions that meet Ron's needs. And we're getting more used to that. So I think data clearly is very important. Going to the protecting part, in my last role prior to joining HP, I worked as Secretary of Innovation for the state of Illinois. And so cybersecurity is top of mind, definitely in the government sector, but also, of course, in the private sector. And so protecting the data, the role of the CISO has expanded exponentially. It used to be just the data within the IT world. Now it's expanded to all the devices that perhaps the company serves, to the vehicles. I worked for Toyota for 19 years, and the vehicle itself became an IoT device. And so that expanded. So the role of the CISO has completely grown for the right reasons, in my opinion. And the last one, going back to the empowering customer centricity, I am blessed that when I joined HP, it already was established an employee experience group. And the sole purpose of this group is to improve the employee experience. Because we do know that sometimes you get better experiences off your home devices and your home environment than at your work. You know, you're working at home, you have all these cool things you can tinker with, and then, this is back in the day, hopefully, you go to work and you're like, okay. And I remember the days, and with all due respect to our friends at Lotus Notes, there was this note remembering where you go to the office and you're dealing with Lotus Notes, but you go home and you have all this other cool stuff when it comes to email, and that's just talking email. Today, we have so many collaborative tools, and I think one of the challenges CIOs are having today is best in breed. What are the best collaborative tools for what purpose? And sometimes have a service catalog that says, for this purpose, this is what you use. So again, there's a lot of things going on in this space between the data, the security, and the customer centricity. And Andrew, I think you hit it spot on. The world is evolving, and I haven't even included the fact that we're all sitting at home due to a pandemic. So we'll probably dig into that a little bit later, but that has changed the landscape, and hopefully we'll get out of this in the next, sooner than later. I'll say that much.
Absolutely. We will definitely talk about some of the data around remote work and so forth. And I find it interesting you mentioned Toyota too, and kind of their philosophy, which I've heard in public settings before, which is all around go and see, right? Like go and verify, get the data, really use that to inform your decision making. We've definitely seen them using, end user experience management tool, more of an employee experience focused team to go out and actually see what the issues are, talk to people, get all that information, make improvements based off that. So that's really interesting.
And that Japanese term is called Genshi Genbutsu.
Yes.
And at HP, they leverage it the same. Get out, understand how they're leveraging the tool and the product, and improve it. You can't just kind of sit in a bubble, send it out, and assume everyone's working as designed. You have to understand how it's being used in real life applications. And you learn a lot from that. And I think, Andrew, you hit it on the head. You have to be as engaged as possible to your end customer, because honestly, someone else will. So you should definitely be doing it yourself.
Absolutely. So data is key for all those listening. You got to protect it. You have to use it. You have to go and gather that, from the customers that you're trying to support. So, awesome. So that covers sort of information in the future of work and how important it is for CIOs. The next topic is around integration. Ron, you mentioned it, so many different collaboration applications that are out there, particularly, sprawling in this work from home environment as people have invested in different tools to fill any gaps that they might have. So that's definitely been coming up here. But, three of the things that we had talked about, as planning for this webinar as key areas are, what is the role of IT to become a little bit more product-centric. So you see evolution to multifaceted internal, external product and program environment, building strong relationships with the rest of the business, and driving that tighter orchestration between those different types of applications. And there's definitely, a lot of trends that we're seeing with regard to these three kind of meta points here. And you mentioned one earlier, which is the rise of the digital employee experience team. That is absolutely something that I've been seeing at Forrester too. I say the leading organizations out there are going to have a dedicated team that's 2 to 3 people, usually, that is working cross-functionally across all the different service owners in your organization, to basically, take more of a product, mindset to how you're delivering products to the end customer, the employee. So that includes things like journey mapping sessions, understanding the user experience of different platforms, collecting telemetry data. One really good example, and this is a public example that you can look up as well, is ABN AMRO in the Netherlands, where they have this separate team of digital employee experience folks. They have a different name for it overall, but essentially they are looking at quantifying and tracking the employee technology score over time, and trying to make improvements based off the data that they're collecting. So it's not as if these are just sort of ideas that are out there. This is what real organizations are doing. And, ABN AMRO is, a highly regulated organization that's really putting a huge, emphasis on this. So it's real, it's happening right now. In terms of the sort of working across the business piece of this is another giant piece. And the biggest trend that I've seen specifically in this pandemic is much more, collaboration between technology leaders and HR leaders. Whether it is providing a chatbot capability for an employee that could help them, figure out how to set up their office from a technology perspective, but also answer questions about HR policies related to COVID-19. That's one I've seen a couple of times from different organizations. There is a lot of talk around what we call zero-day onboarding. So when I get hired at an organization, particularly if I'm a remote employee, being able to get access to a portal that would enable me to choose what device I want, what applications I want, fill out my necessary forms, and basically do that before my first day of work, so that when I do come to work on my first day, my device is there, it's ready to go, or it's shipped to my house if I'm a remote worker. So that does require a lot of collaboration between IT, in terms of creating those processes, linking into HR processes, leveraging whatever, enterprise apps and so forth the HR organization uses. But that's definitely one that I've seen increasingly because of the pandemic. And tighter orchestration, of course, is a key area. We mentioned a lot of the sprawl that's happening with enterprise applications out there. Often I hear about this in terms of productivity suite. If you're using, Microsoft or using Google, and you want to integrate that capability with other apps, third-party apps that you might have out there, that's a significant undertaking. And making sure that you have that integration, that you don't have this sprawl of tooling, is a really important capability to make sure that you develop, so you don't have this kind of overwhelming set of tools available to employees. So, Ron, your take on that?
Whoa, this is another hour, probably 90-minute conversation, but I'll try to, again, break it down. So there's just so many things that, on this topic that's so relevant, and this is something that, again, historically, way back in the day, CIOs were compartmentalized. They were kind of only responsible for this area, this area, this area. And the CIO role, in my opinion, has expanded tremendously. And the partnerships we build are so instrumental to us moving things forward. So first, let's talk about the onboarding process. You pulled the cord on that one. The onboarding process is so important nowadays for organizations because it's a very hyper-competitive environment, and how you get onboarded really does matter. Really does matter when it comes to onboarding. And so I take my example, for instance. Before day one, there was, of course, day minus whatever, and I was given information so I could prepare. So by the time day one happened, it was more like day maybe 2 weeks in, to be honest with you. And that actually resonates. And when you think about recruiting, people do remember that onboarding experience. They remember, did it take them 3 weeks to get a monitor or a keyboard? I know colleagues in the industry who have had concerns where the monitor was delivered, but there's no PC, or vice versa. And then someone's sitting idle, and then they're just looking through pamphlets until their equipment gets there. And people really remember that onboarding experience resonates with folks. And so the ability to partner with HR to get ahead of the curve is extremely important. And I'm proud to say HP was in the 300s, and now we're just ranked, I think it was announced yesterday, so we're ranked 17th when it comes to best employers according to Forbes, which is a great badge of honor saying, hey, employees like working at HP. And I honestly feel that the power of technology partnering with a business partner allows that engagement to happen. And then the pandemic has doubled down the importance of that. So that's the one first thing. The second thing I'll quickly say is you're absolutely correct. You have a collaboration here, you have a video chat thing here, and if they do not talk to each other seamlessly, that experience gets so broken down. And my thinking is always about a value chain. I think of from input to outcome. And what are the different, like a fish diagram, and what are the inputs and outputs that improve that experience? And so a role of a CIO, honestly, is to do that. And you're doing that no longer with just your staff. And I think you guys would remember about 20 years ago or so, the industry started changing, a lot more outsourcing versus insourcing. And of course, there's a value story to all that. But at the end of the day, you're not really delivering anymore, in some cases, with your own badged employees. And that's now normal. And so how do you encourage your non-employees? Of course, encouraging employees is top of mind, right? That's very important for the integration side. But part of the integration is integrating in your supplier partners to really feel and understand your value proposition to your end customer. So the integration is not just technology, it is the different groups and organizations that meets the needs of your organization. Kind of like the Ritz-Carlton model. At the end of the day, everyone hopefully should be able to respond to the question because the end customer doesn't quite honestly care where the problem started. They just want it fixed. And so having that mindset is very important. That's the integration part. And the last one I'll say, and I'll just especially to a pandemic, I was having a chat with my son. He's a sophomore in college, and he's studying data science. And I was talking to my daughter. She's a senior, final year. And we're talking about work from home and all that. And it's kind of akin to, and thankfully my kids don't know this, but when you go to a casino, for example, it's like this closed environment. You're in a bubble. There's no windows. You know what time of day it is. And you just kind of work and churn, work and churn, work and churn. And the 9 to 5 is no longer truly a 9 to 5. And the employee has now become essentially the clock is always turning for some reason, right? And there's exhaustion that kicks in. And so the one thing we don't want is technology to be an inhibitor from them doing their jobs. Because also, and I'll close with this, every single one of us has now become our tech support. Like we're level 0, level 1 tech support. Let's call it what it is. So it's very, very important that we enable them through better technology so their tech support job is really minuscule and they can focus on the task at hand. It's just another thing that I don't want them to worry about, especially in the times that we're in right now. So everything you touched on, Andrew, was spot on. But again, that integration is not just a technology stack. It is the players that actually contribute to your ecosystem. So I think, again, I could talk another hour for this. I know you could too, but I think I'll close it at that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And we refer to that as sort of extended enterprise at Forrester when we talk about sort of the integration of third parties and how does that work. And I think one of the interesting things is that has changed for CIOs too, which is very right on that point, which is that you own way less of the technology than you did 15 years ago. A lot of this is outsourced or is hosted on a public cloud somewhere, or is you're reliant on Microsoft or AWS or Google or someone like that. And I'm finding a lot of the conversations that I'm having with folks are, I want to have better visibility over the stuff that I don't actually own and I don't control, and I need to have something that can get some data. I can go back and say, this is an issue, an outage with the cloud provider and not something that I've done. So that's sort of another development that I think has happened too, is owning less of the technology, places less of the onus on the CIO to manage it, but also changes the responsibility in terms of what types of data do I need to collect in order to get down to like root cause analysis on different issues that I might have. So absolutely, totally agree with you.
Yeah, and the one thing, and then before we pivot to the last one, my moment of like everyone has that epiphany moment, right? And mine was, I think it was early 2000s or so. We really started more cloud. And I was going through a normal audit, right? Our internal auditors were coming and they started asking questions, where's your data? Where's your data? And I realized I can't just say it's up there, like it's in the cloud somewhere, or I could just say the company. They needed more, and that's when I realized that I need to do a better job of partnering with the internal audit team, for example, to explain the paradigm shift that you used to be able to ask me, and I could tell you it's on that array and that data center, blah, 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 and I can't do that anymore. So I have to do a better job of educating my peers in audit, but I also have to bring people in like cloud engineers who can help me kind of decompose that. So the world has changed, and cloud is one of those examples where we need to do a better job educating our peer group what the new world looks like.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's a really good example. And certainly, GDPR and, different regulations like that make that also compounded in difficulty.
Yeah.
Great. So that covers a lot of the integration, pieces of this. And just a reminder, you can submit questions to the chat as well. And we'll collect those there. So the last area is around inspiration. And how do you actually provide technology that helps inspire people to be successful every day? And I mentioned earlier on that we have this concept of the Employee Experience Index at Forrester, which basically measures engagement of employees from a scale of 0 to 100, right? And 100 is I'm super engaged, I'm highly productive, I provide discretion for my company, I'm very likely to stay at the company for the foreseeable future. 0 is basically I'm not engaged at all, I'll even go to someone else. But when we look at the levers, I mentioned 30% of that was technology. The other key areas are 40% is empowerment, which is all around sort of clarity of my goals and manager support. But the other 30% is inspiration and feeling like my values align with the values of the organization. And then I find that my company is innovative. Specifically, that statement pops out in the Employee Experience Index as being a key driver of inspiration. So although technology does impact the overall experience, the inspiration that's driven from that experience is another compounding factor that can impact engagement, either driving it higher, or if it's just not inspiring at all, driving it lower. So it's a really important aspect to think about is how do you seem like an innovative technology organization to your users? How do you inspire them with new types of technology? And I think one of the key things that we're thinking about right now is what is that new technology that we're going to give to remote users going forward to help inspire them? I think most people out there are kind of settled in terms of, I have the right technology to do my basic stuff, video conferencing, I have a device, I have, a chair maybe, and, I'm basically up and running. Our surveys tell us that most people are, up and running with regard to their technology environment. But a lot of IT decision makers are asking about how can I provide new inspiring technology to help fill some of my gaps. So prior to this, 47% of technology decision makers said that they were not prepared to handle the massive volume of remote workers from COVID-19. And so now they're starting to look back and say, what types of technology can I provide to those users to help drive that inspiration higher? And certainly there's a couple of key areas. One is, sort of recreating that collaboration experience of being in the office and doing whiteboarding types of activities. Digital whiteboarding capabilities are one of the hottest topics that I'm receiving right now in terms of inquiry volume from clients, where they really miss that face interaction that can be, very inspiring. The other areas are things like what we call virtual worlds. So this is really interesting category of technologies that is meant to recreate the physical layout of the office in a digital plane. So imagine that you are working from home, you can log into a web browser and it gives you your full office layout, and you have a little avatar that walks around the office that can be at your desk, you can be in the kitchen, you can be at the coffee station, you can be in the conference room. And it enables this kind of ad hoc type of collaboration that I think a lot of us really miss being in the office. And so there's an emerging technology group, like I mentioned, called Virtual World, trying to fill that gap. And interestingly, they've even gone to the level of mimicking audio spatial environments. So, if Ron, you're talking to me and I turn my head to the left, I would only hear you out of my right ear. as I'm in that world. So they've even gone to this level of like recreating the acoustics of what it's like to be in the office. So pretty cool, emerging, inspiring technologies that are starting to come out. And if you start layering, VR, AR type abilities on top of that, and it starts to get really immersive and interesting in terms of how you're solving those problems. I also hear a lot about recognition platforms. I think it's no secret that a lot of us, there's been a lot going on in 2020 and, a lot of new challenges. And I think one of the major things that organizations are dealing with right now is how do I keep resilience high in my workforce? And recognition platforms that can provide inspiring stories about what are our colleagues doing at work? What are our colleagues doing outside of work to maybe help the community that's been impacted by COVID, and providing a lot of those really inspiring stories to tell to people. That's also increasingly part of the technology organization. There's a bit of a corporate comms HR flavor to that as well, but fundamentally the technology selection is within the IT department. So I'm seeing a lot of organizations say, okay, how can I provide more resilience to my employees by giving them these recognition platforms, really highlighting the good things that they're doing, at work and outside of work, to really build that higher level engagement. So I think our idea of what could be inspiring technology is expanding, especially as we deal with the unique challenges of 2020. So that's certainly my take on inspiring technology. Ron, anything that resonates with you or comes up as really important in this category?
Yeah. So I've said before, and I'm going to sound like a record, but we could have held this one for 2 hours as opposed to just an hour. This one resonates with me for a variety of reasons. The first thing I'll say, full stop, is that when I always try to think how I write myself into a story, how do I contribute to an organization that improves the situation for something or someone, right? And that's how I always, and as I've kind of grown through into my 25th and 26 years in tech, that kind of becomes more hardened. And there's also a fallacy that, and I believe this is true, millennials are very mission focused and purpose driven. I think everyone really is. Like everyone really is, wants to make sure they're contributing. And so, and again, I'm just going to brag for a second about what HP does, just very, very high level. And there's a personal story in this. So with the 3D printing that we have pretty much become very expert at, the fact that our 3D printers are printing swabs and other things for COVID testing, there's a true connection between the products and the services that we provide to a situation that's happening today, right? And so when you hear that, it inspires you that you will work that extra hour, you'll work a little harder, because you're contributing to something that is just a global problem. And HP is historically known as one of the seeding companies of Silicon Valley that runs towards problems and finds solutions. So that in itself is amazing. From a personal perspective, when you think about a mission and inspiring folks, when it comes to this planet that we have that has finite resources, we really have to be good stewards of what we have here for our kids and our next generation. Hopefully everyone feels the same way. How we do it, we can debate that, but we need to do that. And so my parents migrated from Haiti to Chicago, the hottest place on earth almost, to one of the coldest places on earth, in the late 60s. And so when I was going through the interview process, and I go back on occasion, I lost a few family members in the quake. So it's a land and a people that means something to me tremendously personally. And then I'm learning that HP has installed recycling centers in Haiti. These recycling centers collect all the bottles. There's a lot of waste, unfortunately, on the island. And so recycling centers create this ecosystem where people collect, clean them, and that becomes the plastics that go into print cartridges and devices. And so right now I'm talking to you from a Dragonfly laptop. It's an amazing laptop, an HP laptop. Roughly 30% of this laptop was made from recycled material from the shores of Haiti. It came from that recycling center. And so for me, that is a connection. That's a thread for me that makes me want to encourage to go even further. And everyone has their own reason, their own inspiration. That is mine. So I was going to quickly throw that inspirational personal story. But I think it's our job in a time like this, more than ever, as leaders, but of course as technologists, to try to find those solutions to try to improve the condition. And in some cases, ironically, create normalcy. There was a time when, if you remember, not too long ago, a year and a half ago, we wanted to be more virtual and how we could be a little bit more extended, right? Now we're finding solutions how to bring us back together. And I just find that fascinating in the fact that technology could do that. The other thing I'll quickly speak to in very, very high level is, when we talk about the social injustice challenges that we're having in America, is that how could we find ways to kind of create commonality and share the experience and have people have a different perspective of other people's history. So, creating VR experiences so everyone can immerse themselves in what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. Technology could do that as well. So the inspiration part, I just spoke of the pandemic. I just spoke about social injustice. But let's just talk about work a little bit more. It's tough. I think everyone would agree. It's tough. We want to get out. And I can tell you, I recently purchased an e-bike because I like biking, but why not be a little more lazy and let technology help? And so I've been tinkering with the e-bike, got my son one, and we're out and about. We're trying to enjoy life. And I think what we need to do in corporate IT is try to make it easier, as we've mentioned before. The onboarding, making collaboration tools sync better. But more importantly, create the connection between the employee and the leadership team. Enrique, our CEO, has frequent updates for the team. Our chief transformation officer has frequent updates. That connection that we're like, okay, we don't need that. We need it more and more than ever today, in my opinion. And the reason this is important is there's this mental health aspect that I think we all need to make sure we focus on. It's something that we don't talk about much. And the beauty of technology is we can find solutions to hopefully improve that condition as well. So the inspiration part is something, again, we could talk about for a while, Andrew. And the stuff that you shared about really immersing it as if you're in the office or really the haptics, and that is absolutely amazing. And I know that we technologists can figure that out. We really can. Now, I hope by the time we figure it out, we're back in the office and there's some normalcy again. But our goal is to make that happen. And so I am ridiculously proud not to only be in tech, but be with this great organization. But honestly, due to tech, I could have this conversation with you, Andrew, today. I'm here in Chicago. I'm not sure where exactly you're at, but we could have this conversation, and then it's a connection, and technology is allowing that to happen. So again, thankful, and the inspiration part, I think, is honestly the thing that we need to double down on the most of these three. They're all important, but this is the one that kind of keeps people going, because at the end of the day, there's always a human behind technology for now. And then one other thing I want to quickly say, and this just goes back to one of the earlier ones we talked about, data. We are so excited about AI. We are so excited the fact that I can pick up my phone, it knows a pattern, it says, are you driving to the office, right? Well, for the last few months, no, but, driving to the office, right? And that experience is only as good as the data we have behind it. And I just want to make sure we double click on that. We do want to do machine learning. We do want to do AI. But if we have bad data, the experience and the outcomes are going to be also bad. So that's another reason I want to go back to the first one real quick, the importance of data to make things like that transformation really, really happen. So before I forgot that one, I just want to throw that one in there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ronnie. Yeah, and I totally agree. Really awesome points there. So we wanted to wrap up on just, how do you do some of this stuff and some of the major trends that we've been hearing about, from Ron's perspective as well as Forrester's perspective. So there are a couple of key areas here where we do see, organizations really thinking about how do I actually tackle some of these issues. Certainly enablement of cloud and digital environments continues to be a major area here. And specifically, what I've heard a lot about in the pandemic is cloud-based management over employee-facing devices, right? So actually 65% of organizations say that Windows 10 will significantly make it easier to manage their PC fleet going forward with some of the more cloud-based APIs. So that's definitely one example from me where I definitely see a lot of organizations trying to provide a more inspiring experience, drop ship a PC to someone's house as opposed to having them go pick it up somewhere or go to the IT help desk to go pick it up, as a more inspiring kind of experience overall. Ron, what do you see on kind of the cloud and digital piece?
Well, a couple of things. So the first one I'll say is self-healing tools. And it's a tactical thing, but I think it's very important. When I mentioned earlier that we're now disk side support, it's true. Prior to this call, I had to do a little disk side support to make sure my devices worked, even though it worked like 3 minutes ago. But it's very important that we install things that are self-healing. I think that's extremely important. The other thing I'll say is the ability to, how do I put this? Get information, because what happens is when you're stuck in front of a screen or a device or a monitor, there's so many things going on, right? It looks simple because it's a portal into your work life, but you get an email here, you get a message here, you get a message here, message here, but you're also engaged in a video conference. Like, bring the tools that can bring that all together and help you highlight and manage your day a little bit better. Because what happens is you get consumed during the day, your brain is fried, you have no white space, and then you're catching up after hours, whenever after hours is for you. And it's rinse and repeat. And you literally don't remember the days that it is. I know it's an ongoing joke, but I think today's Thursday. So it's one of those things. So I think that's the other thing that we could do. We could find ways to help people be more productive. And I believe there's tools out there, I won't name them, that bring that together and leverage AI and ML to make your day and learn the way you operate. And so you can be more effective. So those are the two things I'll quickly say: self-healing and a way to collaborate your information so you can be more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of call that consolidation digital workspace technology. There's also analytics tools that do some of that capability, but I think that's a great call out. The more that you can like reduce context switching and cognitive overload for people, the more they're going to be able to recharge at the end of the day and come back fresh the next day. Automation of key processes. You mentioned self-healing. That's another great area where I think a lot of companies are looking to automate key processes that are pretty manually intensive. I think about a company like BP, for instance, that has done a lot of work in providing more of a self-service portal for people to go, access devices and refresh devices and so forth. So they're actually putting, more choice into the hands of the users, which, helps them feel more autonomous, but also reduces some of the load in terms of, imaging and, setting up those devices and so forth. It also is related to this proactive end user experience management space as well. If you start to collect all of that data and understand where your gaps are, you can really start to make some huge improvements. I mentioned 20% of organizations were looking into this type of functionality over the next 12 months. Companies like ABN AMRO, for instance, are using that functionality already and actively tracking what is the digital employee experience score at my organization, right? So those types of capabilities are becoming more and more important as organizations mature and start to hit these three key categories that we've been talking about this entire time.
And I think and this is a good thing, everyone's struggling with this. Every industry, every sector, everyone is struggling with this at this point. And when everyone has challenges, hopefully the mind share, because it's to improve the good. The competitive side of this is secondary, to be honest with you. We just want our people to be good and whole so we can get back to normalcy. So if everyone's kind of jumping on this, we'll find some really quick solutions. And again, I wish by the time we get solutions quick and then we're already back in the office and we can find a way to make this a hybrid solution.
Awesome. So our last three key areas here before we open it up for Q&A are consolidation of key infrastructure, support for remote employees, and protection of at-home and office environments as well. So maybe we can cover these ones, Ron, and then we'll wrap up. We can open it up for some audience questions. So on consolidation of key infrastructure, the biggest thing that I see organizations out there doing right now is trying to get their device management consolidated, right? Using a platform for mobile and traditional PCs in a single area. So you're reducing, licensing costs. You're making it easier to drive policy for devices and support different types of devices. Actually, 62% of technology decision makers say that they are planning to use a single console for managing both mobile devices and PCs. So that's a significant change, what we call unified endpoint management. That continues to gain steam. on the support for remote employees here, I mentioned, I think earlier, that 34% of employees say their company does a good job of remotely engaging remotely located employees. So we're not doing an awesome job with remote workforce enablement, and this is something everybody's learning for the first time as well. So it's not a huge surprise, but looking at, how to provide better technology to support remote workers, better access to information, more choice in the home working environment, as well as taking more of a holistic approach to remote work enablement continues to be a big area of interest from a lot of my clients. And finally, on protection of at-home and office environments, it goes back to that whole data discussion. It goes back to zero trust and protecting the data wherever it resides, having continuous verification and authentication happening at the device, the app, the user, and the network level. And really looking at all those key variables to basically say, my data is not going to be in my data center anymore. Therefore, I need to continuously assess the health of all these different technology areas if I really want to make sure that, I'm not inherently trusting any one system to be secure. I really need to establish that trust continuously and often with all those key areas of the employee technology ecosystem. So Ron, final words here from you.
Yeah, so all three of them that you spoke to, I'm not going to double click on stuff that you were so spot on. The consolidation, though, is one that we are obviously focused on because when you try to find the positive in the situation we're in, it's like we start looking at things and really understanding, okay, what things are really being leveraged and what things that we could actually shut down or just atrophy. It needs to go away. So we're using this opportunity during this Mother Nature, everyone has a timeout, right? So that's kind of what's happening. So we're leveraging that moment. Support for remote employees, that's a tough one, and I agree with that because I think if I can remember, I was coming back from a trip in Dubai, and when I left to go to Dubai from Chicago, I didn't have to wear a mask. On the way back, I was wearing a mask. So in that 1 week that I was gone, the world kind of changed. And we all were planning that this is going to be a 2 to 3 month thing, 3 or 4 months at best. 6 months, that was a stretch. And now we're talking, we're 9 months in this, and we're looking at as long a runway. So as technologists, we're thinking short term because we're just going to pivot back. To now we have to kind of reset our thinking of that. So every company is struggling with the remote. Even the companies that actually have mastered remote from home are also struggling with it because it changes everything right now, and how you collaborate is very important. So we are focused on that. In our world, our employee experience team is partnering with HR. We actually have weekly calls with Tracy Keogh, our CHRO. She's truly engaged. Alex Cho, head of our personal systems, and Marie Myers, our transformation officer, and myself. We sit and we talk about what can we do better. Because the struggle we have, and I think everyone's struggling with, is yes, we can get metrics on WebEx, Zoom, Skype. We can get the metrics, but it doesn't really show productivity and engagement. That's just a challenge. It's just raw numbers. So how do you pivot that into something that's actionable? So that's an ongoing issue. And in the protecting at home, I said this earlier, the footprint of the CISO has improved, grown exponentially, in my opinion. And so our responsibility is to give people tips on what to deal with when working from home, how to protect your assets, truly understanding if your son or daughter is on Fortnite or playing some kind of online game, it will have an adverse effect on your ability to do your job, or if you have a whole bunch of e-learning going on at the same time. So again, your ecosystem is now part of the work ecosystem. And it's actually, like my son goes to DePaul, my daughter goes to Chicago, I'm now competing with them as well. And so what's more important, dad working or you getting educated? Well, you getting educated. So we have to make sure this works. So we're finding ways to kind of coexist. And I gotta say, I love the fact that I actually can chill with the kids a little longer and they don't have to run. So I give them a hug and it's great. So there's upsides to all this. But technology is a huge enabler, Andrew, and I think you hit everything spot on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I love your perspective on that. That's a great grounding us in the important things. So I think what we'll do now is we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'd love to invite Abby back in to kick us off in the Q&A portion.
have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your control panel. We do have some questions that were submitted, Andrew, and I could read some of them to you if you'd like.
That would be great. Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, here's one that came in. How do I optimize data security?
Well, I think it really goes back to that whole zero trust discussion that we started to have with this as well, which is really looking at protection of data on devices, in transit, wherever that data is going to be going, you need to have protections around that. So think about it as an access model. What variables do I need to look at in order to determine whether someone has proper access to that data? So that could be things like, is the device that they're using infected with malware? If so, probably don't have them access the data. Is the application that they're using a sanctioned application or an unmanaged application? Most of the time, if it's unmanaged, you probably don't want to put that data in that area or grant that access. Are they on a network that is infiltrated by bad actors? That type of thing. Could be a public Wi-Fi network. Sometimes there's some restrictions there. And of course, user identity, looking at, the basics around username and password, which hint isn't the most secure way to do things. You can do biometric authentication, passwordless types of authentication, certificate-based, that don't rely on the username and password capability. But the point is you can look at all of these different variables to say, okay, if I hit 3 out of 5 of these, or I hit 4 out of 5 of these, or maybe I want to set the policy where I need to hit 5 out of 5 of these policies in order to access that data. That's how you start looking at sort of data security in the context of zero trust, is really looking at that across multiple variables. And the key point here, not to forget, is this needs to be frequent. It's not do this every 3 hours. It's do this every time that there's a transaction that needs to be made. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you send a multi-factor prompt every single time someone tries to access something. But as those variables change, you definitely want to make sure that you're being continuous in terms of how you're verifying that the person is who they're saying that they are and that they have a secure enough operating environment to access that data. Ron, anything to add on that?
Yeah, you hit it pretty well. The couple of things I'll just, multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, endpoint security. There's rings that you could kind of put out there to kind of protect you, but also, and I think everyone knows this, and I apologize for picking on we humans tend to make, we allow bad actors just by not knowing. So educating your user community, letting them understand the importance, phishing campaigns, those little things really keep it top of mind. And the last thing I'll say to that is I've always said that the CISO is an important role, but he or she is the spearhead of it. But the group, everyone has to see themselves as a CISO. And when you're working from home, you're absolutely the CISO of your home. So everyone has to take on that responsibility.
All right. We have one more question. I think we have time for one more question. What percentage of organizations will continue to offer work from home as a primary option to their remote workforce?
That's a great question. The way that we've looked at it is more from the perspective of the employee in terms of what percentage of employees will work from home. We believe it's going to be 1 in 5 going forward permanently, which is a big increase from what it was previously, which was about 7%. So about 21% of folks will be permanent, full-time remote workers, and that most organizations across most industries are going to have some percentage of remote workforce. Certainly when we looked at the data in terms of who had transitioned more to the home from an industry perspective, there were definitely certain industries where you saw higher rates of remote working, right? Financial services, government, of course, high tech continues to be pretty much 100%, work from home. Manufacturing, kind of in the middle. There's been more roles that have been able to work from home in manufacturing than we thought, but there's still some on factory presence that's needed in a lot of cases. Retail, of course, is not a big area where there's a lot of remote working unless you're part of like the corporate headquarters piece of this. Healthcare is the same way. Really depends on whether you're clinical health care or working in a different capacity within the healthcare industry. So it will vary based off of the overall industry, but on a global basis, we're thinking 1 in 5 will be remote workers permanently.
All right, thank you. And I think one more question. As we move to more full-time remote indefinitely, what are the biggest technology issues to focus on to enhance and to ensure remote productivity? So what are the biggest technology issues you see, to enhance the remote productivity?
So from my perspective, the biggest gap that occurs is that organizations don't provide a holistic tech experience. In other words, they create the home as kind of a second-class option to being in the office. So they don't invest in things like ergonomic chairs and a second monitor and robust internet connectivity. And those are really the foundations. I mean, you're not going to be able to unlock someone's productivity if they're in pain on a daily basis, right? And there's a lot of interesting things coming out around like reducing eye strain and so forth with various screens if people are connected for that long period of time. So I think the foundational sort of, pain-free working environment is definitely the first thing. And the other thing that I would say is trying to replicate those in-office experiences of collaboration and so forth. So that's another key area too. So any of those digital whiteboarding things I think are going to be really critical gaps to start to fill, especially if you're an agile shop, you're working more with agile methodology. That's going to be very critical. Ron, anything to add there?
No, nothing to add on that one. I think you answered appropriately.
Awesome.
All right. Great. Thank you, Andrew and Ron. Great conversation on the technology trends today. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone.